She looked me straight in the eye during the interview and said, "You're too young for this job." But what neither of us knew in that moment was how much those words would change both of our lives. I still remember the first time I met her. It wasn't just another interview, not for me. I had been waiting weeks for this chance, preparing every line of my resume, memorizing my talking points, rehearsing in front of a mirror late into the night. At 26, with a little experience under my belt, I knew I had more to give than what my record showed on paper. The publishing house was small but elegant, tucked away in a quiet street lined with old brick buildings. When I pushed open the glass door, the faint bell above it chimed, and I stepped into a space that smelled of coffee, paper, and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the dark shelves and scattering across a table stacked with fresh manuscripts. It was the kind of place that seemed to hold stories not just between its covers, but in its walls. Then she appeared. She didn't rush in, didn't stumble. She entered the room the way someone enters a scene they already own. A woman in her early 40s, though at the time I didn't think of her as numbers, but as presence. Her hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, pinned back neatly, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, and yet the sharpness in her gaze told me she measured everything, everyone, carefully. She extended her hand, firm, precise. "Miss Carter," she introduced herself. Her voice was calm, low, and carried just enough authority to make me straighten my posture without thinking. I told her my name, tried not to sound nervous, though the warmth of her hand lingered even after she withdrew it. We sat across from each other in a small office. The desk between us was neat, a cup of black coffee beside her stack of files, and a pen tapping lightly against the folder with my name on it. I could feel her studying me, as though every line of my expression was part of the resume she hadn't yet decided whether to trust. She asked me a few questions, direct, efficient, no wasted words. Where I'd worked, what I'd learned, why I wanted to be here. I answered with as much honesty as I could, letting sincerity fill the spaces where my limited experience left gaps. And then, just when I thought I was making progress, she set the pen down, leaned back, and said it. "You're too young for this job." Not unkindly. Not dismissively. Her tone carried something different, almost weary, almost protective. As though she'd seen too many try and fail, and she didn't want to waste time on another. The words hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, and for a moment, all the hours of preparation, all the hope I had carried in with me, seemed to drain away. But there was something in her eyes, something that didn't match the finality of her words. They lingered on me, curious, as if she wasn't entirely convinced of her own judgment. I swallowed, steadying myself. The room was so quiet I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside. "I understand," I said softly. "But maybe age isn't the measure that matters most. Maybe what matters is how much I'm willing to learn." Her brows lifted slightly. A pause. Her fingertips resumed tapping against the folder, slower this time. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at her lips, gone almost before it appeared. And in that fleeting expression, in that subtle shift, I sensed something I couldn't yet name, the possibility that this moment was not an ending, but a beginning. After that first meeting, I didn't expect her to give me a chance. Her words, "You're too young for this job," still echoed in my head as I walked home that night. But maybe curiosity got the better of her, or maybe she saw something she wasn't ready to admit, because the next morning, an email from her appeared in my inbox. She wanted me to complete a small trial assignment, a simple editorial review of a manuscript draft. On the surface, it wasn't much, just a test. But for me, it was everything. When I arrived at the office, she was already there, of course. She stood by the tall windows, her back to me, scanning a set of documents in the morning light. The glow softened her outline, made her look almost untouchable, as though she belonged to a world that didn't have room for someone like me. She turned, acknowledging me with a polite nod, nothing more. No smile, no warmth. Just that same guarded professionalism. "This is the piece I'd like you to look over," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Her tone was clipped, efficient. "Take your time. I don't expect much." I could hear the unspoken words. "I don't expect you to impress me." So I worked. Hours passed in quiet concentration. The office around me fell into stillness, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock and the occasional shuffle of papers from her side of the room. She was pretending to focus on her own tasks, but I could feel her gaze drifting over to me from time to time, measuring, weighing. I poured myself into the assignment. Every sentence of the manuscript I treated with care, every margin filled with thoughtful notes, suggestions, and questions. I wanted her to see not just what I could do, but how much I wanted this. When I finally slid the folder back across her desk, my pulse quickened. She opened it without a word, her eyes scanning my handwriting. At first, her brow furrowed. I braced myself for criticism. But then something subtle shifted. The tension in her features softened, her lips parting slightly as if she were surprised by me. She looked up, and for a moment, her expression wasn't that of a boss evaluating a candidate, but of a woman caught off guard. "You actually read this carefully," she murmured, almost to herself. I shrugged lightly, trying to play it off. "I figured if I only had one chance, I should make it count." Her eyes lingered on me longer than they needed to. And then she leaned closer over the notes, her sleeve brushing against my hand as she pointed to one of my suggestions. The touch was nothing, a simple accident, but I felt it. A subtle warmth against my skin, quick and fleeting, yet impossible to ignore. She didn't pull away immediately. And though she didn't smile, I noticed the way her voice softened when she said, "Interesting." That was it. One word. But in her tone, in the shift of her posture, I realized something important. She had expected me to fail. Instead, I had unsettled her. Not because I had done something extraordinary, but because I had proven I belonged here, in her world, and maybe, just maybe, closer to her than she had planned. The trial assignment turned into another, and then another. Before I realized it, I was spending more nights at the office than at home. She worked late too, always the last one to leave, always the first one back in the morning. I wondered if that was her way of avoiding loneliness, or if work simply demanded so much of her. Either way, those long evenings became ours. The office after dark had its own kind of atmosphere. The overhead lights were harsh during the day, but at night she only kept a desk lamp on, its warm glow spilling across piles of manuscripts. The city hummed softly outside the tall windows, headlights and neon signs flickering like restless fireflies. Inside, it was quiet enough that I could hear the scratch of her pen, the faint clink of her coffee spoon, even the steady rhythm of her breathing when she was deep in concentration. I started bringing her coffee on those nights. At first, she raised an eyebrow as if I was overstepping. But she accepted the cup anyway, and the smallest smile touched her lips when she thought I wasn't looking. It became a ritual. I'd place the mug on the corner of her desk, careful not to disturb her papers. She'd glance up, meet my eyes for just a second longer than necessary, and murmur a quiet, "Thank you?" Sometimes we worked in silence. Other times, the silence cracked open and conversation spilled out. Not about deadlines or business, but about books, memories, and life. She had this way of speaking, thoughtful, deliberate, as though she weighed every word before offering it. One night she told me about her first job, how she had been underestimated too, brushed aside by people who thought she didn't belong. I remember the way her voice softened as she said it, the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, lost in memory. "You remind me of myself at your age," she admitted, then quickly looked down at her papers, as though the confession had slipped out by mistake. I wanted to answer, to tell her she reminded me of everything I admired in a person, strength, grace, and something gentler beneath the surface. But instead I just nodded, letting the words settle between us. There were moments when the closeness felt almost tangible. Like when she leaned over a manuscript to show me a correction, her sleeve brushing against mine, the faint trace of her perfume drifting toward me, elegant and understated, like she was. or when our shoulders almost touched as we read through a passage together, the space between us narrowing until I could feel the warmth of her presence without looking up. We didn't acknowledge it. We didn't need to. The air carried its own weight, a kind of quiet current that neither of us dared put into words. Those nights weren't romantic in the way people might expect. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Just two people sharing space, sharing time, until the boundaries between colleagues and something more began to blur. And though nothing had been spoken aloud, I could feel it, a shift, small but undeniable. The office wasn't just her world anymore. It was slowly becoming ours. I should have known it wouldn't stay effortless forever. After those long evenings together, something shifted in her. One morning, she walked into the office and her walls were back up. Her voice was clipped again, her questions short, her tone strictly professional. It was subtle, but I felt it instantly. The warmth from our late-night conversations was gone, hidden beneath the cool surface of her authority. She no longer lingered over coffee. No more quiet stories, no more sidelong glances when we both reached for the same stack of papers. Instead, she kept her distance, retreating into her role as my superior, and making sure every word between us carried a businesslike weight. At first, I told myself I imagined it. That maybe she was just busy or stressed. But as the days stretched on, the silence between us grew louder. One evening, after most of the staff had gone home, I found her standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. Her shoulders were tense, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if she was holding herself together. I hesitated before speaking. "Is everything all right?" She turned, startled, and for a moment I thought I saw something raw flicker in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I'm fine," she said. Too quickly. Too firmly. I nodded, though I didn't believe her. The silence stretched until I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. Finally, she sighed and set her papers aside. "You make this place feel different," she said quietly. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "And that scares me." The admission landed between us like a confession. Not loud, not dramatic, but trembling at the edges with vulnerability she was trying hard to hide. I wanted to step closer, to close the space that had grown between us these last few days. But I didn't. I stayed still, sensing that if I moved too fast, she'd retreat completely. Instead, I just said softly, "Different isn't always a bad thing." She gave a small, almost pained smile, but didn't answer. Her hand rested on the edge of my desk as she passed by, not quite touching me, but close enough that I felt the pull. For a split second, I thought she might let her fingers brush mine. But she didn't. She pulled away, walking back to her office with her usual composure, leaving me with the ghost of a moment that never happened. That night, as I packed up my things, I realized something important. This wasn't about me being too young for the job anymore. This was about her fighting against something she didn't want to admit was happening. Something growing between us that neither of us had planned, but both of us could feel. And for the first time, I understood, hesitation wasn't rejection. It was fear. And fear only comes when something matters. It happened on a night when the rain came down harder than I'd seen in weeks. The city outside was drenched, the streets reflecting headlights like sheets of moving glass. Most of the staff had rushed home early, umbrellas in hand, eager to escape the storm. But she stayed. And so did I. The office felt even smaller that night, its walls wrapped in the muffled hush of rainfall against the tall windows. The sound was steady, almost soothing, and yet the air carried a quiet electricity, the kind you only notice when you're alone with someone you've been trying not to think about too much. I found her at her desk, frowning down at a manuscript under the glow of her lamp. The power flickered once, twice, before fading into darkness. She cursed softly under her breath, rummaged through a drawer, and pulled out a small candle. With a strike of a match, the flame flared to life, casting a warm golden glow over her face. I had never seen her look like that before, softened by firelight, shadows painting gentle lines across her features. She laughed then, the sound unguarded, lighter than I'd ever heard it. Romantic, isn't it? She teased, though her eyes flicked toward me quickly, as if to check how the words landed. I smiled, a little too quickly. Depends who you're stuck with, I guess. Her laugh came again, and for once it wasn't edged with professionalism. It was just her, human, warm, almost playful. A draft crept in from the cracked window, and she shivered. Without thinking, I slipped off my jacket and held it out to her. She hesitated, her hand hovering just above mine. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse, but then she sighed and accepted it, her fingers grazing my wrist as she pulled the jacket around her shoulders. The touch was small, barely a second long, but it burned through me like fire. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice softer now. She drew the jacket tighter, breathing in its warmth, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders relax, the weight of the day, of the role she always carried, easing just a little. We sat there in the candlelight, the storm wrapping the city outside, and the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, like a pause that didn't need to be filled. For the first time, she wasn't just my boss. She wasn't the woman who had told me I was too young, too unprepared. She was just her. And for a moment I thought she let me see the version of herself she kept hidden from the world. That night didn't end with anything dramatic. No confessions, no sudden gestures. But it ended with her still wearing my jacket as we packed up, her hand brushing mine as we reached for the same stack of papers, either of us pulling away too quickly. And when we stepped out into the rain together, side by side beneath the same umbrella, it felt less like chance and more like something quietly, inevitably, beginning. It was late again, another evening when the rest of the office had emptied out, the echoes of footsteps long gone. Only her light and mine remained, two small islands of glow in the otherwise shadowed space. We had just wrapped up a project that had taken weeks, one she had doubted I could handle when she first handed it to me. Now it was finished, neatly stacked on her desk. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, as though the weight she carried had finally shifted just a little. I stood across from her, waiting, for her verdict, for her sharp critique, for the reminder that I still had something to prove. But instead, she surprised me. Her fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the desk, then stilled. She looked up at me, her gaze holding mine with an intensity one hadn't felt before. I was wrong, she said quietly. The words hung in the air, soft but heavy, carrying more weight than any criticism ever had. I blinked, caught off guard. About what? Her lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. About you. About this job. About thinking you were too young. For a moment, I couldn't find an answer. My chest tightened, not with nerves this time, but with something deeper, the feeling that she was letting me into a part of herself she didn't share often. I thought you'd give up, she continued, her voice lower now, almost reflective. Or that you'd get careless. But you didn't. You worked harder than I expected. Harder than most people twice your age. I swallowed, my throat dry. Or maybe, I said softly, you just underestimated how much I wanted to prove myself, to you. The words slipped out before I could catch them. Honest, unpolished, carrying more truth than I intended to reveal. Something shifted in her expression. Her guarded composure wavered, and for the first time, she didn't look like my boss. She looked like a woman, standing at the edge of something she wasn't sure she should step into. Silence stretched. The air between us thickened with everything unspoken. Then, slowly, her hand moved across the desk. Not quickly, not boldly. Just a small, tentative gesture, until her fingers found mine. The contact was delicate, trembling almost, as if she might pull away at any second. But she didn't. She let her hand rest against mine, warm and real, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just let the moment breathe, afraid that if I broke it, it might vanish. Her eyes softened, and though she said nothing more, I could feel it, the truth she wasn't ready to say aloud, but couldn't hide anymore. In that quiet office, with only the hum of the city outside and the faint brush of her hand against mine, I realized this was the beginning of a choice. A choice she hadn't made yet, but one she was no longer denying existed. The night we wrapped up that project, the office felt different. Quieter, softer, though maybe it wasn't the office at all. Maybe it was us. She lingered by the door, her bag slung over her shoulder, but she didn't leave right away. I could see the hesitation in her, the way her fingers tightened on the strap, the way her gaze flicked toward me and then away again, as though she was trying to decide if she should say what was on her mind. Finally, she sighed and leaned back against the doorframe. Her voice was low, careful. "Maybe it isn't about age," she said. "Maybe it's about trust." The words settled between us, warm and steady, carrying more meaning than anything else she'd told me. For weeks, we had danced around this unspoken current, pretending it wasn't there. But tonight, she wasn't pretending anymore. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough that I could see the faint lines of weariness around her eyes, and the strength behind them too. "You can trust me," I said quietly. "Even if I'm not what you expected." Her lips curved into the smallest smile, the kind that felt fragile but real. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence speak for her, let the closeness fill the room in ways words couldn't. We walked out together under the night sky. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening, the air cool and damp. She walked beside me, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine every few steps. It was nothing anyone else would notice, but I felt every small contact, every subtle reminder that she was choosing not to step away. At the corner where we usually parted, she paused. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at me as though weighing something invisible. Then, slowly, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on my arm. The touch was small, a thumb brushing once against my sleeve before she pulled back. But in that brief gesture, I felt everything she hadn't said aloud. The hesitation. The fear. The quiet, undeniable pull that neither of us could keep ignoring. "Thank you," she said softly. Her tone wasn't the professional politeness of before. It was personal, intimate, filled with a warmth she had held back for too long. I nodded, not trusting my voice, afraid any words would break the fragile beauty of the moment. We stood there a little longer, two people caught between the lives we were supposed to live and the connection we couldn't deny. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something forbidden or impossible. It felt like something patient. Something worth waiting for. As she turned to leave, her jacket still draped loosely over her shoulders, my jacket, I realized that this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning. And for once, neither of us seemed afraid of where it might lead.